night, ladies and gentlemen. So our next topic is the demographic changes in the 18th century Hungary, because in the 18th century there was a huge demographic change in Hungary because as you see in the background, here in the background, this map is really important because we have these different colors, and these colors show the different nationalities which settled down in the country, or they had been living here for a very long period. So we are in the 18th century, and the first thing you should remember is that Hungary is part of the Habsburg Empire, and everything started after the Rákóczi freedom fight when Charles III was the king, and at that time we are in the beginning of 18th century where serious population losses were or had been. We mustn't forget that there was a Turkish occupation. It was over, but the central territories of the country were empty because of the Turkish territories. People were driven away from their homes or died during the wars. Villages left empty. And there was the Rákóczi freedom fight, where also a lot of people left their places of living, and they wanted to find some safer places. There were serious famines, and right after the freedom fight there was epidemics at the beginning of the century, so many people died. This is an estimation that in the 15th century, during the time of King Matthias, there was about 4 million people in the country, and here in the 18th century, beginning of 18th century, something the same could be there. So about 4 million people, historians estimate. But in this century, 18th century, there was a rapid growth of population, and by the end of the century, about 10 million people lived in the territory of historical Hungary. How could it be? So this is why this is the beginning. Let's speak about the central territories I was talking about is this, where the white sections are all empty places. So this was the most affected territory. Now let's go into the forms of population growth, how they grew. There were actually four accepted ways how population grew. Natural growth, of course, a lot of people were born because after wars there is a lot of newborn babies in the following period, so there was natural growth. But at the same time, there was migration within the country, which actually didn't change the number of people. But by migration, moving in the country, it means that that people from less usable territories moved to better territories. And there is immigration when foreign people settle down in the country according to invitation or they came at their own will. And of course there is organized settling. I'm going to go through all the three of this. Natural growth, I don't want to go into details. So migration, what happens? The wars affected mostly central territories, as I said. So the periphery, the territory in the outer skirts of the country, they were populated. So a lot of Hungarian, Slovakian, Ruthenian, these people are the Ukrainians. Romanian population headed towards the plain territories to the center where there was better quality fields. And of course, this movement was supported by the landowners because they needed labor force. Next is immigration. So foreign people from all over, over the borders came from the neighboring countries. So you don't have to believe that people came from faraway places. No, they came from the border territories, from out of the borders, because there were a lot of free places. So they could settle down. They hoped to have better life than in the mountains, in the Carpats, for example. These were also encouraged by the Hungarian nobility. They needed the labor force because someone had to cultivate lands. No nationalist discrimination at this point, so these nationalities settled down and they lived peacefully together. From the north, Czechs, Polish, Ruthenians came, and from the east, Romanians. I'm going to show you the map. You will have to be able to show these on a map. And the organized settling. So this is the policy of the Habsburg court. This is why we call it organized. Because Habsburgs needed taxpayers, of course. Those people who pay tax and cultivate lands. And of course, they were deeply Catholic, so they needed Catholic taxpayers. Catholic Germans from Bavaria, Bajorország, the Swabian people, we call them Schwabok, they came this period, in this 18th century, to Hungary, and their benefits were provided. They got tax exemption, so they had to pay no tax or little tax for a short amount of time, 1 year, for example, or 2. Just come. Ready-built villages were waiting them with tools and houses, everything. They just had to move with their families. And of course, they got animals as well. So this was a benefited layer, the German-speaking Catholic Bavarian people. And this is from where people came, and this is where they settled down. This is the map of Hungary, and as you see, the Swabians came, and the Slovaks came, some Polish, Rusyns, this is the Ruthenian people, these are the Ukrainians to the northern territories, northeast, and of course, the green one, the Romanians came from the outer territories because these were empty places and landowners needed workforce. From the south, Serbians came because this was the Ottoman Turkish Empire to the south. It was much better living in Hungary than there. And Croats came closer to the central territories as well. So this is why we can say that this map shows the best how many people, how many types of ethnic minorities lived in the country. And let's go to the results. I'm going to go into details about these peoples. The result means Hungary became a melting pot of nations. Hungary became a multi-ethnic kingdom. Okay. Hungarians lost absolute majority. So actually from now on about 40% of society were Hungarians. Still, the largest ethnic group is Hungarian, but they were less than 50%. This is why we lost absolute majority. So became relative majority. And ethnic islands appeared, which means that these villages where only Slovakians lived or where only Romanians lived, and in the next village there were Hungarians, so these lived like little islands in the country. There was no national feeling yet, there was a peaceful coexistence of these nations. Their religion was more important. I'm going to show you these different nations. Well, Hungarians, of course, it's about us, the largest ethnic group. They had complete society. I'm going to speak about this later in a minute. Political power was in the hands of the aristocracy, so we had aristocracy and we were the leaders of the country. The majority of society was still serfs, of course, peasants who worked in the fields, and most of the Hungarians were Roman Catholic and Calvinist people. Now, what is complete society? This picture shows you the society has several layers. Peasantry, serfs, people in the towns, townspeople, burghers, some in-between layers that are, I cannot give you a good example at the moment, but let's say the above layers with nobility of barons and lower nobility. And as you see, Hungarians with red, we had all the social layers. If you have all the social layers, even the highest layers, it means that you have a complete society. But other nationalities were mostly peasants, sometimes burghers, but they had no complete, so incomplete society. Germans had, of course, some layers, leading layers in Hungary, so they had their incomplete or complete society. We can talk about it later. Let's go on to the next people. Serbians in the southern territories, border territories. They were responsible for defense. Of course, there was a fear from the Turks. These people were settled by the court, so they were loyal to the court. They got some privileges, like the free choice of priests. Please remember that they are Orthodox people, so they are not Roman Catholics, but they could practice their religion freely in return for their defense. So there were soldiers and priests who were the leaders of the society. And of course, we are talking about incomplete society because they don't have nobility. Sorry, going on. The next one, Slovaks in the northern part, in the upper lands, incomplete society, mostly serfs. They were Roman Catholics. Their nobility, if they had nobility, they considered themselves Hungarian, so they didn't have real nobility. Traditional professions, sometimes they had Slovaks, like, for example, repairing windows and such. They had seasonal works in the Hungarian plain, so most of them were serfs. Ruthenian people in the northeast, I told you that these were the Ukrainians. They had also incomplete society, only serfs, but they were Greek Catholic people. The next one, Romanians. Of course, they were serfs and mostly shepherds because they were really good shepherds and well respected by the Hungarians even today, that shepherds are best if they are Romanians. Transylvania and in the plain, they settled down, so in the eastern part of the country. And yes, they were Orthodox people. Germans. I would like you to remember that there are two types of Germans in Hungary. These remained, the Saxons remained here since the 13th century, the Arpad dynasty. In Transylvania, these are traders, craftsmen, so mostly living in towns, so they are townspeople, and they are Lutherans, so they are here earlier. But the Swabians who came here, they were invited by the Habsburgs in the 18th century, Roman Catholic people. They are the incomplete society, of course, because most of them are Serbs. Going on, Croats. The Croatians are special because Croatia is part of Hungary and this was a personal union since 3rd century. So they have complete society. They are acknowledged by the Hungarians as nation. Just think of, for example, Zrínyi Miklós. He was Croatian born, a Croatian noble, but he is also acknowledged as Hungarian. So Croatians are a nation acknowledged by Hungarians. The leader was the Ban. They had their own parliament, the Szabar, which had connection with the Hungarian Diet, and they were deeply Roman Catholic people. And let's go to some others. There were some other people like Gypsies and Jews. Gypsies were not settled down, so it was really hard to estimate how many they lived. But they lived a vagrant lifestyle, I mean wandering around in the country, finding traditional professions, practicing traditional professions, helping around the houses, repairing tools and such. But it was really unsuccessful to settle them down. Even Maria Theresa wanted to settle them down, but it was impossible at that time. And Jews. Jews mostly came here from the North Polish, South Polish territories, from Galicia. This is what we call North Polish territories, Galicia. This was a poor layer, so they are not very wealthy people like bank owners or such. They were poor people who were traders, sometimes shopkeepers. The wealthy Jewish people came from the West in the 19th century mostly. So these are the ethnic groups you must know. North Slovakians, Upperland. Northeast, Ruthenians, Ukrainian people. Transylvania, look how many Romanians already live here. This is Hungarian, this is the Székely people, the settlers. Germans, the deeper color, reddish or brownish. The Saxons in Transylvania since the 13th century. And these islands here, the Swabian people who settled down in the 18th century. Going to the south, Serbs and Croats in the south. I hope it was easy to understand. Thank you.